Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. You are very welcome to this, one of the first workshops in the RNI days. Thank you for coming. We're going to start. We know you've all been pressured to get to the room in time. We want to make the most of our time. So I'm going to ask everybody who has a telephone to make sure that it's on silent. I'm the only one who's allowed to look at my telephone for the next hour, and that's to make sure that we keep to the time so that you can get to the next session so that we can have this really good conversation and make the best of it all. You are here now to talk about something that is essential for our strategic planning with regard to Horizon Europe. And our goal today, in terms of that strategic programming objective, is to identify the most important technologies on the horizon for industry to prioritize. No, you're not. But thank you. But if you'd like to take over, but we have to keep a direction on of new technologies, where they're coming from, and to new opportunities that might be just down the road. That's because we can observe already from technology-driven companies, they are always looking for the next new thing, how their environments are constantly changing, and we have to be conscious as to whether or not we in the research domain are able to keep up with that. Just as the funders of technology are also trying to be ahead of the curve, and it's important for them to offer opportunities that are ahead of the established practice. So that's really the context in which we are working. Now, we are looking out from one part of the new Horizon Europe program, which is Pillar 2, and particularly the cluster on digital industry and space. We have a focus area, an intervention area called Emerging Enabling Technologies. But of course, we want to be looking outwards. We do not want to allow ourselves to be bottled into that silo. We actually have to look across the board at all of the technology areas to make sure that Europe is ahead of the curve, just as I've described, in order to be able to look at what is the next technology horizon. That's really the issue for us. How do we make sure that European industry doesn't miss out on new opportunities, even those that are arising in different sectors? Because as we're already learning, there is a breakdown of barriers between traditional industry and economic sectors. And often others with a different discipline can grasp technologies and run with them in areas that those applying the technology in the first instance didn't realize. So those are some of the issues that bring us to this session on looking forward. What are the new technologies? To help us in that, we have a starting point, which was a great workshop that was run in Oslo in July. And the report has just been published, actually, yesterday, and that will be summarized now by our first presenter, who I'm going to present to you. That's Julian Muller. Julian is the rapporteur for that Horizon Scanning workshop, and he's professor for logistics and operations management at Salzburg University of Applied Science, and he's also a visiting professor at the Jagiellonian University in Krakow, and I'm sorry if I didn't pronounce that correctly. So, Julian, if I can ask you to make that presentation. Perhaps I just say also sitting beside him is John Arne Rottingen, who is the Chief Executive of the Research Council of Norway and a visiting Fellow of Practice at the Blavatnik School of Government in Oxford, and who was also the host of the workshop in Oslo, so he'll have something to say. And then after we've had that presentation, I'm going to present the rest of our great panel to you. So please, Julian, take it away.
Thank you very much for your introduction. I think that's a little bit too loud, but I'm going to speak. That's fine. Thank you. Now, we have this wonderful report just published, and I'm going to try to give you a very brief overview of what we did in Oslo. We had 2 days discussing a lot of topics, and this will just be the wrap-up. The details will be behind this in the report. Now, first of all, this report is not trying to give you an overview of everything that's possible. It's not an extensive list, but it's a specific purpose to look at technologies that, one, go beyond ICT, Industry 4.0, digital technologies, because we wanted to look at the technologies that might complement digital technologies and the developments we discuss at the moment regarding the digital transformation. And two, we're not trying to get everything in it, because we had participants from all over Europe, and they were only allowed to present one single technology. So it's work in progress. It's the first round we had there, and we're trying to sum it up in the future and to complement it and also bridge the link to digital technologies. Now, presenting those frameworks of technologies that we had in Oslo, we had 5 technology clusters, which you can see here above me or on the left side. At the core is biological transformation. The idea is to bring in technologies which we can learn from biology, from nature. There's a strong link to medicine, to medical fields, to biology and associated fields. And the idea is that technologies that are closely connected to nature, like smart farming, like neurotechnologies, caring about future diseases that might come up, and further technologies integrating humans into production, those are the ones to be named here. And because this is a trend alongside digital transformation, we put it at the center of this technology framework. On the bottom right, we have marine technologies. We discussed if that's also biological transformation, but we wanted to keep it separate because there was a huge discussion that technologies which might be below the surface in the ocean are not as well represented in many research areas yet. We talked about digitizing fish farming and also about fresh water undersea reservoirs. So developments in these fields. Then we had smart materials, additive manufacturing, but with new technologies inside of it. So it's not only additive manufacturing, but 3D printing, but 4D printing, bringing new developments into that. And further developments like on the nanoscale that enable new ways for developments in medicine, in industry, and also in life sciences. What we further discussed, and what is also important for the digital transformation, are low energy transmission technologies. We were referring to coherent optics and smart dust, both technologies which relate to the idea of transmitting energy with as little loss as possible, which you need for data centers, which you need for a lot of communication technologies. And so this is all linked, as you can see, with digital technologies, because if you bring in the ideas of nature and smart materials and link them across the internet, in the Internet of Things, this can generate huge potentials. What we also discussed is our power-to-X technologies, turning energy, renewable energy, if it's possible, to different forms of energy storage or new chemicals like hydrogen, like different processes that can make the chemical industry much more efficient and bring new products with less energy required. This also brings me to kind of beyond the technologies. What we discussed is not only the technologies as such, but the goals and the framework conditions that need to be respected when implementing those. I talked about sustainability, about preserving life in nature, just at 1 minute ago. But further aspects we talked about were public financing and procurement to support the technologies. We talked a lot about different technologies need good access to venture capital, to financing throughout Europe. We talked about foreign direct investment and how those investment can help technologies to emerge in Europe. And we also talked about the legal requirements, the legal framework, and the complexity this has to unfold different technologies. Finally, one word from my side. We also had other technologies at the horizon, like quantum computing, like genetic or the gene technologies, which are on here, but we also said there is something on the horizon which we are not going to discuss yet, but we have a look forward on that in the report. But now I'm happy and looking forward to the panel discussion. Thank you.
That's great. Julian, thank you very much for that quick presentation. Of course, the time we've given you wasn't enough to really do justice to the report and to the workshop, so I do encourage all of you to look at the report and to see some of the very interesting findings and the way that it approached this need for foresight, with the need for an awareness of new technologies. So we will come back to some of those issues, because we're going to be asking you also to give us your opinion on what are the future technologies, the key emerging technologies. Pick one perhaps that is the most important for you. But if perhaps first I could just present the rest of our panel. First of all, we have Muriel Atane, who's here. Muriel is the Secretary General of the European Association of Research and Technology Organizations. And Muriel is a real expert in European research and innovation policy and in funding programs, with a lot of experience in Europe, because before that she was also Secretary General of the European Association of Automotive R&D Organizations. So quite well placed to talk across all of the research silos. Then we have Thierry Butter, Dr. Thierry Butter, who's head of Airbus Blue Sky, which is a research department within Airbus. And that deals with a number of different areas of research, from bioengineered materials, computational neuroscience, and quantum technologies. But Thierry, it's also important to say that you're a member of the Strategic Advisory Board to the European Commission on our quantum flagship, and quantum being one of those key technologies that we want to talk about. And then we have Eva Garcia Munción. You've been the founder of RTDI and RTDI Innovation School, and you have been managing R&I projects for a number of years. So another expert on research and innovation policy and its practical implementation, dealing with SMEs, institutions, and corporations. And you're also now coordinating a CSA under the FET program on evidence-based detection of the most promising technology trends, which is exactly what we want to talk about. So just to start things off, it's an easy one for you, John Arne, as you hosted the workshop. If you wanted to give us your quick perspective on what Julian has presented on the outcome of that workshop.
Well, thank you. And we were really excited to host this workshop together with the European Commission. And Julian gave an excellent sort of brief overview of a two-day rich discussion. Which was interesting in a way, and now also reflecting in hindsight, is that the starting point was pick one technology that you, on the horizon, that you're keen to sort of present, avoid digital or computational technologies. And so that was the starting point. And in a way, you could think that that would then enter into a very technological and sort of, specific discussion. But it's actually entered into a discussion about why, in many ways. It entered into the discussion of how should we use these technologies? Why are this single technology important to me? These were sort of strong leaders from research and technology organizations in Europe. And they were definitely champions of a technology, but at the same time, they were champions in explaining why this technology is important to them. And then it's about utilization, it's about application, it's about how these technologies can be used with a purpose, have a clear direction. And for me as a funder, because I'm a national funder heading a research and innovation funding agency, that's the dilemma then. When we go out and sort of have these discussions, how much should we focus on sort of the technologies and how much should we focus on applications? And I think that's definitely a key topic for discussion probably in this session as well. I just want to say one more thing, and that is there was also a lot of discussion around the need for these technologies to be needs-driven and sort of listening to the needs of the population, engaging with citizens, the concept of responsible research and innovation, so that we're not sort of developing technologies that we are then scared of or using them in the wrong way. And the issue that even if there is not market demand, so strong purchasing power, there still may be societal need and sort of needs in the population for these new technologies. Yeah. And how can policymakers, research funders either try to bridge need to become demand or compensate for the lack of
Okay, well, we're going to come to that, John Arnay, but I'm going to put you all on the spot as if you were at the workshop. So we're going to do this on Slido. Later on, we'll be giving you the opportunity to ask questions, because we do want to get your feedback and input. But first of all, if we could just start with the easy one, the same question that was put to the participants in the workshop, and that is, what is, in fact, for you, the key emerging technology? Can you pick one? What do you have on your radar? And we're going to do a little word cloud on that, which we will show to you later. So we have the details here of Slido. Do we have the access code, first of all? Otherwise, people won't be able to access Slido. You all have it, I'm sure, on your iPhone or on your smartphone, but you have to be able to pick this session. So put that other slide up again. Do we have the Slido access code? Or is it RNI days? Shout louder. You put it up on the slide while we keep talking. Why don't you do that? That way people will know. Thank you. So that people can see which of the many sliders that are going on at the moment. But let me open this up to the rest of the panel, because this is important. In terms of what Julian has presented, what you've seen from the report and the way John Arnay interpreted, what do you think about the report? What does it show us? What technologies do you actually have on your radar screen, just as we've asked the audience? And of course, what else? What is missing? Who'd like to start? Don't be shy. Thierry.
Sure. Is this microphone on? Can you all hear me? Oh, brilliant. Okay. I think when I read through the document, I think for me what stood out, in addition to just the technology that were listed, was really the kind of underlying focus that I think drove a lot of the participants in this effort, which was this. It was written that at the core of it was this idea of purpose, and I think this was a word that you both used in your individual contributions. This idea that it's no longer about just purely the application, but what is the purpose? What is the intention behind this technology or behind this innovation? And I think this resonated with me personally quite strongly, and it also resonated well with how Airbus is shaping its own research and technology organization. And I think that was kind of core to all of the different technologies that emanated. So different sectors will probably have and identify different technologies. Some of them listed here do really tie in with what Airbus is up to, others less. But this idea of purpose, I think, was quite profound.
Very good. Eva, you're doing your own, you are coordinating a Foresight project under FET. So how do the two compare?
Well, the purpose is in everything. So also when you do Foresight, you need to understand your purpose for doing it. Our purpose was slightly different because we were looking into that part that you haven't yet looked at. We are dealing with future and emerging technology, very, very early stage technological sparks. So that made the process slightly different, and of course the result also different. Somehow our question was not only what big tech is the next one. We were also asking ourselves, what are researchers dreaming of for the next decade? Because developing new technological breakthroughs are partly dependent on people holding deep knowledge, dreaming. And by detecting this, we can somehow outline playground arenas where they can collaborate with others, also with other stakeholders, and evolve their ideas, their research further. For example, making them more purpose-oriented. So not only we have screened thousands of signals for sparks, we have analyzed them supported by artificial intelligence. We are now consulting conclusions with hundreds of experts and different stakeholders. But we also, along this process, we are trying to match them, for example, with social development goals. So we try to make them not application-oriented, because that's too much for for long-term future and emerging technologies. It will somehow cut down dreaming, but a little more purpose-oriented. Okay.
So are there going to be some of those involved in basic research here who are going to be now recategorized as dreamers? Yeah? Okay.
Somehow.
That's good for engineers.
So if we compare with the report, sometimes we focus on the same purpose, but we come out with different technologies because we are making different questions, okay? So for example, if we talk about, and we also need to be very selective because this process has to feed a decision-making process that is happening in the next 2-3 months. So we had to be selective. We had to select technologies, and the level of granularity of specificity needed to be good enough for then the next project phase, which will try to scale up critical mass around the jointly selected ideas. Okay, so for example, if we talk about smart farming and digital fish farming, in other perspective, we have detected several topics that could be interlinked and create new horizons. For example, zero power sensors, sensoring and wiring oceans, gene technology also, but from a different perspective. For example, human augmentation, intelligence amplification, life extension. So topics are slightly different.
Yeah. Well, can I come to that, to the choice of topics then? But also what we must come back to is what you're saying. It's a different discipline or different approach to the same topic. Because one of the things that disturbed me, as you would expect, I work particularly in the ICT area. And what I noticed, and John Arne repeated it again, that in fact in this exercise, participants were actually asked to present a specific technology that was not ICT technology. You didn't want that included. No digital transformation, no ICT, nothing that was just Industry 4.0, but had to think outside of that. What do you think, Muriel? I mean, by saying that ICT is a given, are we actually missing the next step? Or what do you think when you work with researchers across all of the disciplines? What do you think of the approach of saying, well, we must look beyond ICT? We're too focused on that.
Okay. Maybe before I comment on the ICT, I start with the beginning, why I'm sitting here.
Yeah.
EARTO members, and I think I have to thank Peter and Doreen and also John Arne for organizing the workshop. I think it's an exercise we didn't have before on foresight at EU level. And why so many of my members were involved in that exercise is, I think, in the DNA of RTOs, you have foresight for technology because it's the basis of their business model. So they will do foresight for managing their own research program internally, for discussing probably the national program they have in Norway, I imagine SINTEF, with John Arne funding. They will discuss the foresight to see what type of future technology and do they have the technology infrastructure that is associated to very forward-looking foresight and what type of investments they will need to have. So foresights with need and with purpose, but sometimes probably different needs and different purpose. Sometimes it will be for their clients, which are mainly industry, where they have to have revenues, so it's a different type of foresights than the one probably you're doing in your blue sky with quantum for Airbus. But in the same time, you have the foresight in terms of as an advising to your ministry, that it would be on the mobility of the future for the cities in your country, whatever. So you will have different type of foresight, and here it was very much technology for prosperity. So the target was slightly different, and the question, I think, is why then you didn't have only ICT? And I think it's a question depending what we're going to do with this list that we now have of all technologies. I'm sure if I asked 10 different of my RTOs, I have 10 different lists of priorities in all the report we have today. And some will probably make ICT more predominant, but I think you see a much more merge of digitalization in all the deep tech. So I think you don't take ICT as a standalone kits, for example, but more something that is transversal to a lot of the deep techs. And if you're looking at the various of the topics, you see quite often digital being underlying. So I think to look at also, sometimes ICT is overpowered or overpowerful compared to some of the, let's say, old cats that don't look so fancy when you're talking about manufacturing and machines, and but when you're looking apps and unicorns, it looks much fancier. And we have a bit of a communication problem sometimes on the old cats. So I think having a report also showing that on foresight in those old cats which are non-digital, there is still a lot of work to do, was the right message for that report too. So I think it's not taking out digital, but it's including it and making a value of the work which is performed on certain areas.
So we're talking about seeing through or seeing beyond the ICT to the science which could come from other areas. Some is really over the horizon, such as the work that Eva is doing, but some of it might be right in front of our noses, but it's a different looking, it's a different angle. So the purpose, maybe we need renewed purpose about some of the research that's already going on if we are actually to make sure that we get it right. So perhaps a mixture of everything, but I would like to come back to that question of purpose so that you can define it for us later on. I'll just say now, the code for Slido, you have 1 minute left to do it, is OR900. So that we can put up a word cloud for you just to see what you think are the new technologies. Because then we're going to look on a bit more as to, well, what can we do with that information, either from very long-term foresight work, which is really over the horizon, to the extent that Eva is telling Julian, you're past it, you're already out of date, you're much too close to the market, we've got another generation of emerging technologies coming after you. So that's probably a healthy discipline. So can we put up the Slido slide, please? Do we have anything to show on Slido? In terms now of the question, which is, what is the key emerging technology for you? What's on your radar? And we now need to put that up. And I'm glad I have my glasses on. Can we boost that a bit more to full screen? I can see, yes, but can everyone else see them? Hydrogen, batteries, fusion. I'm a bit disappointed that one of the 5 areas that Julian's work picked on a lot, which was the lower power, biodegradable sources of energy, particularly for communications. That's one that really caught my attention, but I see that there are others. Okay. Remanufacturing is back there, and delivery. So again, it's a question of doing things that we do now, but probably doing them better. And luckily, otherwise I'd be fired, green is in there, which is, of course, a more ecological and more environmental friendly to all of the science for which we are co-responsible, that we contribute European taxpayers' monies to. So that's an interesting start. But now, if we take all of that, whether it's through the more formal consultations that the European Commission does when we're preparing our work programs, or whether it's through the workshops which focus and bring experts together to really talk about what's coming, or if it's something which is as random and as unscientific as a Slido poll, as well, of course, as all of the work that business and research institutes are doing themselves into foresight, what do we do with all of that information? How do stakeholders sort of marshal that information? How do you actually take actionable decisions in terms of either your research or your investment or your partnering? And particularly let's focus, as I did at the start, on European industry. How does European industry get engaged with that and use that to enter the new technologies more upstream than they have done so? So that's something which I'd really like to ask the panel now. While we're doing that, also you may have questions. So go back onto Slido if you want to during this discussion and give some of the questions that you would like to ask the panel. But maybe if I start, you opened it the last time, Thierry, so I'm going to ask you again now, just in terms of with your quantum hat on, but we can't forget that you work for Airbus under the flagship initiative. What is your company, what makes a company like Airbus? A European company, global leader. What's the tipping point when suddenly a company decides, yes, this is something that we have to go into and we have to get into it seriously, that involves serious investment, serious resources?
Yeah, so I think the answer to that is multifaceted. First off, my part of the organization, Blue Sky, has that very mandate to try and look past the horizon, to try and look just outside of the usual spheres where Airbus might anticipate the future and ask the question of what could be lying there, what could be some of the tools that are today underexplored or still nascent coming out of labs and have a potentially transformative impact for our industry, aviation, flight in general. And I think it's in that spirit that quantum technologies in their many forms kind of came out, and we appreciated them for the potential and the the power they held in different sectors that are very important for Airbus. And to try and give form to that, let me zoom in on one of those technologies, quantum computing. Airbus has, over many decades, had a tradition of deploying HPC, high-performance computing solutions, to help us with some of our more intensive calculations. You can think of fluid mechanics, aeroacoustics, aerodynamics, things that are very traditional for the aerospace industry. Of course, more and more now we have other types of data coming up and the need to process an ever wider and ever larger bank of data to produce new services and new capabilities. So having had this long tradition of HPC, we're keenly aware of some of the transformations that's happening in the sector, and we're aware that the ways in which traditional HPC systems are being built or being designed are no longer holding true. And I think one kind of stipulation to that is the famous Moore's Law, this idea that processing capability doubles roughly every 18 months. We're seeing signals now that is no longer holding true, and the price tag that's associated with that also not holding up. So faced with that, we sort of took a very honest look at what might be above the horizon or just beyond the horizon. What are some of those new technologies coming through? And this is where quantum computing came out as a very key, very important technology. And that motivated us to further get engaged on this topic and really drive us. So when you say what are some of the key elements, the key tipping points, I think it's understanding where are some of the core needs of your business, even though it, in this case, it is not directly linked to aircrafts in flight, but it is intimately linked to the design of these aircrafts, to the planning of how these aircrafts are going to be utilized. So really the overall life cycle of the aircraft can be impacted by this computing capability. So for us to tackle this early and to tackle it with what we know best, namely our aviation sector, and to try and partner with the wider quantum computing community out there, especially the European one, we viewed as quite important.
Okay, so that's very interesting from a big company's perspective. From a country's perspective, John Arne, I mean, what is it in Norway? What are the breakthrough technologies that industry is interested in Norway?
Yeah, so I guess we take a different approach. I believe foresight analysis in this space are tremendously helpful as inspiration and as potentially inspiring individual companies, inspiring whole industries, and nudging them in a way. But it's difficult for us as a national funder to use it too much directive, in the sense of saying that we will now only focus on these 3 or 4 technologies. So we try to take a combined approach and very much driven by the societal changes, the changes in the industrial landscape we need to make. And as you know, Norway is needing a serious green transition in our economy. And of course, moving gradually away from oil and gas as a driver of the economy. But understanding that our real goal in this sort of transition is not really the oil itself, the renewable or the non-renewable source, but it's actually all the supply industry that we have gradually developed over 40, 50 years. And how to nudge that industry and use their technologies, their competence, capacity, by inspiring them in many ways to use their competence in new areas. So inspire them to transfer from oil and gas to deep sea farming, inspire them to do ocean wind farming, inspire them to use their technologies, develop autonomous non-emission ships and so forth. Okay. And so that is more than sort of application driven, but of course we have heavy programs on enabling technologies as a tool for helping them do this. So in a combination of trying to direct them in a direction, but at the same time enabling them through the technologies and enabling them through partnerships with research institutes and universities.
Okay, now from a research and technology organization's point of view, then same question, but what is the role of your organizations in identifying the future technologies and convincing industry and SMEs to engage with them?
I think it's the basis of the RTO business model. if you're looking at all the largest, but even the smallest one, all the RTOs have a public mission, in which they can be regional missions when they are on the regional environment, or a national public mission. And their basic idea of an RTO is that you're getting a fund from the government that you need to leverage with private investment. And this private investment will come to you only if you have something they want. So you need to have an offer of technology skills. That means the people which are very smart and are looking at foresight what the industry will need. And on the other side, you need the tech infra that allows you to do the work you want to perform with them. So an RTO cannot avoid to do foresight, because they have to look at the foresight from the need from the industry, but also the direction that the ministry would go in saying, oh, well, we want to go green in Norway. Then you will have Sintef that has to align, for example, the capacity they have in-house in terms of skills, but also in terms of tech infra, to be able to test electric chips. And now they have a big bag for the normal chips. So can we also test the electric chips of the future here? You will need to adapt. You will need to have a view of what type of sensors you may have in the chips in the future. So you will have to have your own foresight on enabling technology. And I think we sometimes miss, and with what Eva is saying, it's not about the foresight on all technology, but here it's about enabling and emerging enabling technology. And the word enabling, I think, is here quite key. And for this one, you will need to have the guys which are doing a lot of the work and on the testing and on the prototyping for the industry, which are my members, be ready and having also looked at this enabling technology and be ready to offer them to the industry. So if you have a program who says to the industry, you can do that, but nobody is there to help the industry to get there, then you would have a program, but probably it won't fly. So you need the RTOs on board to be able to offer the technology de-risking by having the infrastructure which is there, that the industry doesn't pay it. Let's say socialize the risk when you have an RTO infrastructure, and to some of the industry which may be more advanced, help them and follow, but you have a whole of the industry which is maybe not advanced and has not, like Airbus, a blue sky program, and those guys, you need to bring them on board.
Okay, but then can I ask Eva, from the other perspective, you hear that the need is there, but to a large extent the appetite is there also. So you've worked on FET and other programs with a very low level of technology readiness. How do you make that interesting? How do you show that industry that they do need to make that step, in some cases de-risking it, in order for them to get engaged?
Well, I will start by saying that it is not just one wheel. Either we do like long-term, long horizon foresight, or closer to market. It's not one or the other. We have different wheels that come together to build an engine, which is European industry.
Yeah.
So, for example, long-term visionary technology, the FET program, the Future and Emerging Technology program, was one of the first supporters for quantum computing to grow. And this quantum computing is now offering great opportunities to top industries in Europe. So this is understanding the story, understanding how these processes work helps, and also trying to accelerate as much as reasonable, in a reasonable way, research, long-term technology development based on, let's say, scientific curiosity, which is to be allowed because it was the spark for quantum computing, for example, with trying to increase their purpose orientation, and also trying to make sure that it has enough drive to move along the years. And industry has a great role to play, a most important role to play in this drive along the years. Sometimes at earlier stages, sometimes it's easier with high-tech SMEs because their corporate cultures are closer and they normally take decisions faster and easier. But at some moment on time, the earliest possible, the bigger players are fundamental. Otherwise, the drive will not happen.
Okay, thank you. So there is sort of an ecosystem where there's mutual dependency from all in the community, and we hope that through the work that we're doing with you, that Horizon Europe and our other research programs will also be part of the answer when we will provide the structure and the drive and the bridge from those early ideas to making it real for industry. Now, over to you. We're going to look at some of the questions that have been asked. I hope you've all been dual multitasking as we do this. So we're going to ask a couple of questions, and I'm going to pick them totally randomly because I have no idea what you've asked. So how would you engage European industry more to Horizon Europe to get new technologies to market? So I suppose how would you engage European industry more in Horizon Europe so that we can get new technologies to market? Who'd like to take that? Who'd like to start with that? Please.
I'm happy with that more than the others, so if I can jump on that one. We have looked actually the participation of our members into the program. And what we saw is that the RTOs are actually, in the current program, working on large projects. Minimum average is 14 project partners. And with large budgets, complex infra. And what we also saw was when RTOs are engaged in the project, the participation of the industry is rising. Yeah. And from 6% extra is not nothing in the total of the program. So I think you need to engage also actors that brings you the industry and allows you to have discussion around different value chains, connecting different value chains also together. If you see also the discussion you have on the big common project of European interest, on the future of the value chains, on the future of the CATs, and you need projects and programs where you have the clusters like the Pillar 2. So I think you need also to plan activities where those actors have something to say. Yes. And I think that will be a big fight in the budget of the future program for that.
Well, of course, we like to think, I'm looking at my colleague Peter Droll here from RTD as well, we like to think that in Cluster 4, as it now is, but in that part of Pillar 2, that we are particularly focused in meeting that need, but ensuring that industry is involved, playing their role, giving their input, but also, of course, then able to work with and run with the programs that we're developing across what used to be research silos. So that's something that's very important. I'm not ignoring the batteries question, but I'm going to look at the third question first. Well, it's no longer the third question. It's now become the second one. Thank you. It's in terms of economic growth in the long and short term as a key success measure. Yeah, but what replaces growth as a key indicator? What else can we use while looking at purpose, while looking at technologies that are so far away that nobody can actually tell you what it would do in terms of economic growth? What are the other indicators? And I'll even throw in a question that was one of the ones that came out of the workshop. Where is, for example, social science in all of this? Please, John Arne.
Yeah, you mentioned the term prosperity, and I think in that term, at least from my point of view, it's more than economic growth. It's more of what about driving our economy. I think it's sustainable economic growth with social inclusion. So in many ways, it's the broad scope of the Sustainable Development Goals that should also be our targets in the sense of what are our growth measures in a broader sense. The market is not fully there yet, so then I think the research and innovation system should explore a broader sort of portfolio of indicators and targets that we should try to meet as the finance system moves in the same way. I think what we see now in the finance system with including climate risk as a secondary sort of risk measure in addition to commercial risk, because it's not mature yet to actually integrate them. I think that is and we should definitely be forerunners on the research and innovation side.
Okay. Would anyone else like to take that for 3 seconds? Eva, the question on literally if we're not going to just look at economic growth as an indicator or as a marker of success, what else should we be looking at?
I agree. Prosperity is a very nice chosen word, and its relation with the social development goals. As I said, we are also matching these technological sparks with these goals. I mean, we are facing tremendous challenges in the coming decades, and economic growth is one of them, for sure. But there are so many.
Yeah. Well, can we go back? Can we go back to the batteries question? Because I think it's underlying in that as well. The environment and ecology is obviously another one of those key now top-level essential indicators that we're going to have to work to in all the work that we do. And of course, we could talk for hours about the technologies of batteries, but that's not really the point. It is here, like in other cases, there's a very heavy incremental development focus. There's also quite a huge cost to develop something, which is probably better than the current generation of power technologies. But is it actually a dead end? Should we not be looking at some of the more exciting things like biodegradable power cells, such as seem to be hinted at? And are there dangers in the choices that we're taking, which are investment heavy, have strong industry support because it's what they do now, as opposed to disruptive development of future tech, which is probably going back to whatever is now the equivalent of somebody in their garage, but might actually be a more prosperous future?
So I'll take one part of that question. I think we're a long ways away from somebody's garage project turning into a commercial aircraft. But I think taking some of the essence from this question here, I think for us, not just at Airbus, but more broadly within the aerospace industry, we're keenly aware that sustainability is a huge part of our industry. Our activities in this area predates a lot of the, I think, media attention that has been given on this topic. There's been objectives set in our industry, and something to which Airbus is quite committed to reduce CO2 emissions by 50% by the year 2050 as compared to 2005. And to enable this, the word batteries, or more broadly electrification, so new form of propulsion, is a big part of that. In Norway, there was a big engagement as well to try and promote and push aviation to take a big cut in making flight more sustainable. The point here is not to say that batteries is necessarily boring or fully solved in all sectors. I think there are certain sectors, such as the aerospace industry, where being able to understand how they can come in, how to utilize them, how, specific to the aerospace industry, certify them, making them flight qualified and flight worthy. There's a lot of effort going into this. This is something that we are dedicating a lot of our energy, a lot of resources into. And so I think taking this question and sort of broadening it out, depending on the sector, you do have what you would consider disruptive efforts to try and bring in more electrification, batteries as an example here. But I do think that the types of solutions that will come out can be very sector dependent, very topic dependent.
Okay, thank you. So now this is the free one. Please, Eva.
I wanted to say that for me the ideal would be to think in terms of an engine, okay? Not just wheels, because it seems like everything has to be black or white. We have a gray engine. Some wheels need more guidance in terms of topics or applications to make them more effective. But some wheels, like future and emerging technologies, require more space for freedom to be most creative. They need different things. For me, the calls try to meet these different needs, and they seem to be working properly. What we need to oil is the process from wheel to wheel. That's where I find the biggest space for improvement. In Oslo Workshop, you also mentioned several policy-making measures, not just technologies, but for example, the idea to have sandboxes for SMEs. So not only SMEs could try technologies, but also administrations could test related regulation, because they have to come together. The increasing role of administrations in uptaking technology. This is the process. This is the oiling from wheel to wheel.
Okay. Right, John Ernie, you wanted to add?
Yeah, because I read that question as a sort of criticism towards research and innovation funders, either it being the Commission or being national funders, that we tend to be not taking the big risks. We tend to only fund sort of gradual development or incremental innovations. And to some part, that is actually a fair criticism, in the sense that we have become more and more very formal machines. We are doing everything in a very strict and formal processes. And there is actually an emerging concern among research and innovation funders that we may need new ways of working. And you mentioned the sandpit model, and actually, and that could be both on the project level, as the way we encourage partners to work together when implementing, but it could also be on the programming level. So it's about maybe opening up a bit more. And I think what I read from Horizon Europe is an ambition to open up a bit more. Open up for not necessarily setting in stone what you want to do and then ask someone to do it, but actually focusing more on the process and more on what you want to achieve.
Okay, well, let me bring this slowly back around towards the question of purpose then. But on that, I mean, I'm sure we can all be criticized for our efforts. And some of that criticism is probably very helpful to help us rethink things. So how can we, and how can we help others sort of encourage the right type of projects? Now, that's already highly subjective. So in other words, how do we get interdisciplinary cooperation, a greater understanding between those who are working on close-to-market research and those who are very much at long-term basic foresight? But how do we also overcome a lack of knowledge and expertise? Because it could be that if it's not batteries, there's some other technology that if it breaks through into fuel cell technologies could be the next big thing, etc. That's just my example. But how do we inspire these new directions without imposing one mindset? Muriel.
Yeah, it's funny because if you take the example of battery, I used to work about 11 years at TNO, the Dutch largest RTO, and they did batteries for 20 years before anybody did that, and they stopped 20 years before it reached, being a full-fledged market, and now everybody talks about batteries. So the question is maybe not identifying and starting working on it, is a question of also long-term investments, and those are becoming shorter and shorter. So I'm sure in batteries we had the capacities in Europe to be the first. We just don't have it anymore, and we stop sometime to have it. So I think they have questions of
what's the answer?
Long term. The other issue is on the purpose, and here I see a kind of new development in some of the members of EARTO's, and the large ones are maybe the most advanced, looking at the SDGs, for example. And you have some of the RTOs which are now going into the direction on how do they include SDG in their foresight and in their planning of their programmation. And programmation, I call research, internal research programs, yeah? And this can be millions euro per some of the institutes which are very large. So here I think the question of needs and purpose and where do you go, and not only looking at the short time what the industry needs maybe in 1 or 2 years, but be there for, in 20 years. And here you will have the issue for my members of the long-term investments that goes with it. Okay, it's not only about foresighting, it's where do you put your eggs on, and that goes with the financial questions of the funders, where do you put and where do you want to have results, and it's not always easy. You only have one pot of money, yeah? So you need to choose what you do with this one, and it's not always easy.
Okay, would anyone else like to comment on either interdisciplinary cooperation or how we overcome the lack of understanding?
Yeah, so for this one, I'll put on definitely my hat of member of the Strategic Advisory Board on Quantum Flagship. I think we're sort of confronted with the same reality, and we're asking a very similar question. There in this industry, in this sector, for many of the technologies, it's a matter of bringing different players to scale what is an academic idea into a large commercial system, to be able to take these sometimes young startups through different targeting of their product for different needs, to bring them into contact with microfabrication labs, with other tools. And so in this front, I think one thing that I would put out there as a potential idea is that an entity like Horizon Europe, like these other arms of the European Commission, can be served to bring in these tools. So not direct funding, but rather the tools that can help out, helping startups, directly developing their business plans, bringing in, having platforms that really enable different players from different fields that don't naturally interact with each other to come together to facilitate this bridge, not just through projects, which is more of a classical way of doing it, but on a almost field basis, or on a sector basis, as in trying to bring some quantum technologies to market, for instance.
Okay. Well, listen, Thierry, you've actually anticipated what was my wrap-up question. I'm supposed to make a 5-minute brilliant summary analysing and saying exactly what everyone has just said. I think it's better if I leave that to the panel. And this time, Julian, we've been very unfair on you. You've sat through having made a very good kick-off presentation to us. So you start just by telling us, and I'm going to ask each of you all have 40 seconds. What would be your top recommendation to us, the European Commission, as we work with the Member States, the European Parliament, and of course the research community to design Horizon Europe and the strategic programming? How do we help Horizon Europe to facilitate the breakthrough tech, to really get on top of future technologies?
First of all, you have to make sure to link different research disciplines to make something usable that might be not read yet at a certain industry is usable at another one. Link different schools of thought, different research areas like social sciences, like environmental sciences, and engineers. There must be a balance between curiosity and purpose in the end to help those technologies emerge. And third of all, it's important that linking knowledge from different entities, so not doing research in parallel and incremental to bring something to market, but to know where it's needed at the moment and where to really shift between different think tanks and know when to exchange information. So not aisles of information, but really network. I think that are the three recommendations I can give here.
Thank you, Julian. John Arne.
So I was inspired by Eva's description of how you do foresight, in the sense of you want to understand the dreams of researchers. And I think the dreams are a combination of purpose and curiosity and their knowledge. But the boundary, the problem with dreams is that they are very much dependent on what we have experienced. Freud would say that, and most psychologists, I guess. So the question is how to actually bring something new into our dreams, into the dreams of individual researchers and research teams. And I think that is definitely something research funders like the Commission can do. Actually force research and innovation actors to collaborate across new boundaries. Those can be cross-disciplinary, across academia, research institutes and industry, but actually cross-boundary collaboration so that we can come up with new dreams.
Thank you. Eva.
Yeah, for me, interdisciplinarity is also stakeholders is also a must. Sometimes it doesn't just happen. You need somebody to actively work for it to happen. The European Innovation Council is aiming at this, just to give an example. And to allow the necessary level of freedom to be creative, because this also happens if there is a space for creativity, collaborative creativity, at the different levels, in the different time scopes that technologies are. Mm-hmm. So I would focus on the process, on the oil between the wheels, actively manage interdisciplinarity, because it doesn't just happen, and leave enough room for this interdisciplinarity to be creative.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm going to skip you for a moment. Yeah, you started already. Muriel, you're...
I think if the last words, I have a target for Peter. Do we do that again next year? That's really my question to him. And to John Arno, if they are ready to host again. And what do we do next? Are we going to use that for a certain priority setting or others? I think that's a question. Now we have a tool, and what are we going to do with the tool?
Okay, now you started answering, you've got your last word. Thierry.
Yeah, so I think I echo a lot of the sentiments. We talked about cross-disciplinary, going across boundaries, breaking down these silos. I think for me, these are all strong echoes, both for the responsibility I hold with the Quantum Flagship, but also at Airbus. I think taking a very industry perspective, I would say we are on a day-to-day challenge to operate in a very fast-changing environment where competitors can come in from different areas. And so I would put out there the challenge almost to different funding bodies, the European Commission as well as national funding bodies, how to help businesses, whether big or small, to function in what is for them a very rapidly changing environment and to be able to adapt and pivot and change quickly. It's not always easy to do that, to set up the programs in such a way as to do that. And that's why I go back to my previous statement about not just projects, but offering the support structures and infrastructure to enable them to sort of operate quickly, to be able to latch on to different services that they might need to grow and to help.
Okay, thank you very much. Listen, we're going to have to stop it there. I want to say just two things to you. First of all, you can continue this discussion. You'll all now read the report that's been handed to you if you didn't already to do it, but you can continue the discussion tomorrow in the Horizon Village. That's in your program. And we have a question in Slido. We'd be very interested if you were to answer that question so that we can take it away, and that's part of our work. That's part of the input that you will give us. And the last point I wanted to make was please do participate fully in all of the consultations that we are doing for you, including on the strategic programming for the Horizon Europe program. There's others like Digital Europe program and others, but your input is essential on this and other questions. So all I have to do now is to thank our panelists very much for their engaged performance. Thank you for all the questions, for your interest, and I look forward to continuing the discussion. So thank you to the panel.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Sorry if I was stressing any of you out, but